greatest industrial nations shifted into high gear virtually overnight. Production lines began to move at full speed with incredible efficiency and volume.
The Wings of Eagles 97 air show, sponsored by the National Warplane Museum, was held in Elmira, New York. What makes this air show special is the number and quality of the warbirds that participate. The term warplane refers to any aircraft that served or saw action during a time of war. In addition to the fighters and bombers, this includes liaison, utility, cargo, and reconnaissance aircraft. What few people appreciate is that every plane at this show flew here under its own power. Unlike car shows where it's possible to trailer vehicles in, there's only one way to get these planes here. Every one of them is authentic to the World War II era, and many of the planes actually flew combat missions. They've all been flawlessly maintained or painstakingly restored to the degree that they could fly many miles to be here. The planes themselves, and the Air Force veterans who come here to see them, are living history. Everyone goes to the effort and expense to make this show happen, just because they love planes. Before a pilot was assigned to a squadron, hundreds of hours of training were required to perfect his skills. The trainer aircraft often reflected the combat tactics and style of the forces that employed them. The British Royal Air Force used the small, light, and nimble de Havilland Tiger Moth to teach its pilots the in-close and tight dogfighting skills they would need during the Battle of Britain.
It's a British training plane from World War II. It may look like a World War I plane, but it's a World War II plane. A training plane, the British pilots were trained in it. It compares with our Stearman training plane, which is down the line a ways. And I'm an ex-Navy pilot. I trained in Stearman's, and then I bought this plane because I'm fascinated with the type of it and the way it looks, because it's quite different. And it's a heck of a lot of fun. I marvel at the fact that British pilots flew this and then stepped out of this and into a Spitfire and a Hurricane and a Lancaster and a Beaufort and Mosquitoes and every other kind of heavy iron, we call it. And this was quite a step. It's very docile. It's very easy plane to fly. It has very little trim control, so that the pilot has to fly it all the time. And that's why they had it as a training plane, to make a guy learn how to fly. I flew Hellcats and Corsairs off the aircraft carrier Lexington. I dodged a lot of bullets. I managed to shoot down 7 enemy planes. And
so you're a real ace.
Yeah, I guess so. I'm back here to tell a story. That's about as good as you can say.
The American and Canadian Armed Forces preferred the ruggedly built and heavy North American AT-6 Texan to teach its pilots a dive and slash method of attack.
Okay, hi, I'm Andy Stern. I'm from fly out of Northeast Philadelphia, from Villanova, Pennsylvania. And behind me is my T-6, commonly today known as the T-6. Back at the time, the Second World War, the Navy called it the SNJ. The Army U.S. Army Air Corps called it the AT-6, or the Advanced Fighter Trainer, and that's what this was. This was the Advanced Fighter Trainer. There were different levels of training that the pilots went through. They started with a primary trainer, and then a basic trainer, and then an advanced fighter trainer, and this was the last level of flying that the pilots engaged in before they went off to fight the war. That's the fighter pilots. And it's powered by a 600 horsepower Pratt & Whitney radial engine, 9-cylinder. Gross weight is about 5,300 pounds. And at the time, during the Second World War, this had guns on it. It had guns on one gun on the wing and one gun in the fuselage, and it was able to carry bombs. This particular aircraft has a paint scheme known as Guantanamo Bay. It's a group of T-6s that were based in Cuba during the Second World War. And after the war, they used T-6s. After the Second World War, they actually used T-6s in Korea.
In addition to pilots, navigators, bombardiers, and flight engineers also needed to be trained in flight operations. This required the use of large multi-engine trainers.
Well, I'm Brent Tyrrell. I'm from the Canadian Warplane Heritage in Hamilton, Ontario. This is a 1944 Avro Anson Mark V that was built in Montreal by McDonnell Brothers. It was primarily used as a bomb aimer trainer, a navigator trainer, a pilot trainer, and a radio operator trainer. And at the beginning of the war, Ansons were originally used as bombers over in Britain, and they were used as coastal command for checking out the coast as far as, excuse me, you want to go flying?
Yeah, that's okay.
That's okay.
I just talked to DC3 and they said we're up now.
Are we?
Yeah, give them a call again on the ground.
Okay.
Is this your handheld?
Is this yours? Here.
Yeah.
Here, can you pass it out to him and he can give him a call?
There you go.
And this was used for coastal command to search for submarines and downed crew members. The aircraft is a great airplane, weighs a little over 10,000 pounds. It's all constructed of wood. The technology of the fuselage was developed by Lockheed Corporation in the United States. Thousands of pilots in the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan were trained on these aircraft as navigators, bomb aimers, wireless operators, and they eventually moved on, the pilots moved on to bigger things like Lancaster bombers. The airplane is constructed, I think I've told you that, entirely of wood, except the engines are Pratt & Whitney 985 radials. So it's got quite a good envelope. Stalls at 42 miles an hour dirty, and cruise about 160 miles an hour and burn 35 gallons of fuel an hour. I don't know what else I can tell you other than it's typically British. Some of the controls are backwards to what the American airplanes.
Go on a little bit about that.
Well, the only thing that's really unusual is that on a go-around, typically in an American-designed aircraft, all the levers go forward, throttle, propeller, mixture. The throttle and the propellers go forward and the mixture comes aft. So you have to make sure that you're doing it right so you don't kill them. The U.S. Air Force had 7 of these on strength. Yeah, and I looked that up in Jane's, so they were silver with stars and bars on them. And they can be a handful on the ground if you're not careful, but other than that, they're a great flying airplane.
While many people focus on the wings, fuselage, or guns of a warbird, the key to its success was usually the engine. A good solid engine would often turn a mediocre aircraft into a great aircraft. There were 2 types of engines commonly found on warbirds: water-cooled inline engines, similar to what you would find in an automobile, or large air-cooled radial engines.
This engine is a Pratt & Whitney 1830. That's 1,830 cubic inches. It's got 14 cylinders, 2 rows of 7. The radial engine, it shows that the cylinders all stick out in a circle. And this is for air cooling and ease of maintenance, because you can just take one cylinder off at a time if you have to maintain it. It develops 1,200 horsepower on takeoff, as he drinks 40 to 50 gallons an hour on cruise. They're playing 80 to 100 gallons total when you're just cruising along.
Now, what advantage would this type of engine have over, say, opposed an inline engine?
Mainly just ease of maintenance, because it's not very long. The engine's only this long. See, and you can work on it. It's just like an old Harley-Davidson motorcycle engine. If this cylinder has a problem, unbolt it, take that cylinder off, change the piston, put the cylinder back on, and without disturbing an entire engine block. So, they date all the way back to World War I. And then, once the jets came along, that kind of made the death knell for these type of engines. But they were used well up into the 50s and like that. If the engine does go sour on it, we have to send it out to a maintenance shop and send along a check for about $35,000. And they'll send the engine back when they're done, all nice and shiny.
After an engine overhaul is complete, mechanics wire a penny into a space on the engine block. Here a Canadian penny is shown on the engine of a Royal Canadian Air Force Harvard trainer. Bombers were the largest and most destructive of the war birds. Quicker twin-engine medium bombers were often used tactically to support ground and naval units, whereas larger 4-engined heavy bombers, employing crews of 10 or more, were used strategically to drop their loads of munitions far behind enemy lines. Whatever their missions or roles, the bombers were often the center of large battlefields, fought in the skies, unseen by those below.
I was the staff sergeant. My name was Steve Pisani. I flew out of North Africa, late 42, early 43, and then from North Africa we went to Fallujah, Italy.
Yeah. My name's Dick Bodycomb. I was a B-24 pilot during the war. I came a little after Steve. In the fall of 44, in the winter, I was there when the war was over. Got to fly a B-24 home.
You guys all volunteered, correct?
Well, I didn't volunteer. I had somebody co-sign for me.
Well, I was a freshman in college when Pearl Harbor came, and I was in Army ROTC. So I was already one step in. Then the draft board in the summer of 42, like every 20-year-old guy in the United States of America got a draft in the summer of 42. And I said, I'm not going to be a foot soldier crawling around in the... Then they were crawling around the desert. Not too long after that, Steve was in North Africa. That didn't sound very good to me. I'm going to enlist in something else. So it was either the Marines or the Army Air Corps, and I chose Army Air Corps.
Well, we were young kids. We were 17, 18 years old.
I had two 17-year-olds. They lied to get enlisted.
So did I.
When I was 20, they called me Dad.
What was an old man back in those days?
20. Our squadron commander was, we called him the old man. He was a major, and I bet he was born 24.
He was a
We were young guys. I only had 500 hours flying hours. And they took me for 240 hours and stuck me in the left seat of that airplane here in the States. You know, you take a 240-hour pilot today and put him in a 65,000-pound bomber and give him 9 other young guys that he's in charge of. I mean, that's a big order. So we bit it off, and if we couldn't chew it, they got somebody else.
I'm Ken Elder, Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum, which is located out of Mount Hope, Hamilton, Ontario. And the aircraft behind me is a B-25J Mitchell, and it is painted in the colors of 98 Squadron, Royal Air Force, and it was actually flown by a Canadian crew. Most of the 98 Squadron was a Canadian squadron. And the aircraft was used extensively in Holland, France, Germany, and it is dedicated to the members of Canadian Warplane Heritage and the members of the 98 Squadron who have won distinguished flying crosses in their service overseas. The aircraft was acquired in 1976. It was built in 1945 and went into corporate service. It was in the last production run of B-25s that came out of the factory. And it was picked up by several different corporations and used as the actual Learjet of its day. It was all done up inside with cushions and pillows and executive chairs and bars and so forth, and was used by, I think, Timken Bearing Corporation had it, King Korn had it for a while. And as I said, the museum acquired it in '76, and it has flown basically continually since then, other than for a few months downtime. It is still undergoing restoration. The interior is not complete yet, but it is still going.
How long were your missions?
8 hours. Ours were mostly 8. He was a little further north.
I was up at Fort.
We were quite a bit south of there. It took us an hour or so to circle right over our own field before we'd start up the Adriatic. So they were 8 to 9 hours.
And what was the conditions like for fun? How high are
we? 23 to 25,000. They could go a little higher, and they did. We'd see them going by 25. You'd see fortress formation, and I used to say to my co-pilot, "How'd they do that? How'd they get up there? This is supposed to be a better airplane." And then we'd go back to the field that night, scratching our heads.
So what were the temperatures?
They were about 50, 55 below zero.
And how did you stay warm?
We had electric suit. We had underneath our suit for electric flying suit. It was a silk impregnated with wire. Then you put the flying suit on, then you're heavy. And then we plugged it in by each crew position. It had just like electric flying kit. You could select from 0 to 10, however you felt what you needed. And you could select that. And that's the other thing that kept you alive.
Yep.
And for them, the most terrible thing in the world was the guns were jammed, and they had gloves on, and they were worn over and over and over again. Never take your gloves off. Because that metal, if they touched no fingertips, no nothing.
This is a Heinkel 111. It was the main German bombers that they used in the Battle of Britain and the Spanish Civil War. Ours was built in Spain, so it's a Casa, and this particular airplane was one of Generalissimo Francisco Franco's personal transport. So it was never built as a bomber; it's built as a transport. And what we've done with this one is we've reinstalled some of the guns. We stacked bombs in the what used to be a passenger section to show people what an authentic German bomber would have looked like. This flies with the pilot and co-pilot. The original bomber just had a pilot, did not have a co-pilot, and there was a crawl space at the front of the nose of the airplane that the bombardier forward gunner could crawl up and operate the bomb sight and the forward gun. The Arizona wing of the Confederate Air Force took over this airplane about 6 years ago. And when we got it, it needed a lot of work done. Structurally, it was fairly sound, but the electrical system needed to be replaced, as well as the hydraulic system was inadequate for what we do. So all those things have been upgraded. Also with the Spanish Heinkel that we have here, this has Rolls-Royce Merlin engines. It doesn't have the Junker Jumos like the original Heinkels had. This is the only one in the world still flying. There's another one in the Kavanaugh Museum in Dallas, Texas, but it's not airworthy, and then there's a couple static displays over in Europe. So it is indeed a rare bird. Originally, when you take a close look at this airplane, you'll see it's actually lightly armed. There's guns all over the place, but they were not a very large caliber gun. They were similar to a 30 caliber gun. But when this was first designed, the Germans designed it as a transport for Lufthansa, being that part of the agreement with the Treaty of Versailles was that they could not build any kind of a warbird. So it was built as a transport for Lufthansa with the full intent of building the Luftwaffe up. Later on, or when it was built, it was one of the fastest airplanes out there. It would max out at about 260 knots. Most of the fighters of the day were flying about 200 knots, so they didn't really feel a need to put a lot of heavy defensive armament on it. Later on, when the British came up with the Spitfire and had the Hurricane and greater numbers, and then when the Battle of Britain, of course, was before the American involvement. But during the Battle of Britain, they shot a ton of these things down over the English Channel. So and then too, the British shot down a lot of the BF-110s, which was supposed to be the fighter escort with this. But they never did upgrade it as far as upgrade their bomber force throughout 1936 all the way through. Actually, even the Spanish maintained this as a bomber after World War II. But in particular, the Germans never really created a 4-engine bomber. Their whole bombing philosophy was to support the ground troops. And that was one of their downfalls, because, as you know, the Russians dismantled all of their industrial plants and all their factories and moved them east to the Ural Mountains, and the Germans had no way to get that far on the available fuel loads and the available airplanes they had at the time. Even though they had the FW-200, the Condor, which was a 4-engine transport, it was fully capable of flying that distance. They never converted it into a bomber in any kind of mass production, and it really was their downfall.
Well, I had it pretty easy. They killed most of the good German fighter pilots by the time I got there. Flak was our biggest enemy. The German guns were very good, and they threw up an awful lot of metal, and you had to fly through it.
And what was going through your mind?
Well, I was scared most of the time. I preferred to fly. We took turns with my co-pilot. Depending on which side of the formation we were on, we would get to fly the bomber on. And I would prefer to fly the bomber because it doesn't have to look out and see the flag. I'm flying formation, so I'm watching who I'm flying on. When it was not my turn to fly on the bomber run, I didn't really like that.
And what was, like, from your perspective, in a tail?
Well, at times I swear you could get out and walk on that track, right? Dick, it was so heavy.
It
was very intense.
German guns, we gave them an awful lot of credit. They had an elementary radar, and they knew pretty much what altitudes we were at. It was no secret. The height finders on a good day, they could figure out what altitudes we were at. They cut the fuse on the shell so it would go off at that altitude. There was 128mm shell that big. It's like a huge hand grenade. It would break up, fracture up in parts, and it would fly through it at 250 miles an hour. Oh, I think after 19 missions, we had probably 13 to 14 planes back and forth.
How did you know when you were hit by fire?
You'll feel it.
You'll feel it.
The airplane will bounce it. Up front, it sounded like a handful of gravel thrown on a tin roof.
I was just going to say the same thing.
You'd hear it hit, and you knew that when the airplane was, then the guys your own guys would call you.
Yeah.
One night, my guys wanted to bail out on me. They said they were leaving, and I said, no, don't do that. You'll be POW. We were way up in Austria. I said, stick with me, and I think we can get it home. And they did.
Yes.
And when I found out later, when I saw the airplane, I knew why they wanted to jump out, because the whole tail end was wide open. The tail gunner, his position in a B-24 has got a giant Emerson powered turret. It's bigger than this, and it's hydraulically operated. And all the glass has gone off it. And the gunner they wore big flak helmets, and they spun him around, and it looked like somebody taking a ball-peen hammer and hit him on the head. There was a dent in his helmet, but didn't cut through. So they turned him around, and they told me, Larry, one eye was going this way, and one eye was going this way. He had concussion, so they jerked him out. All the glass was gone. We'd left him in there. He had a frostbite. I said, pull him out, and lay him on the floor, and put some oxygen on him. He came to after a while. I know why they wanted to leave.
What was it like when you were in the tail of this?
Scared all the time. Certainly, because the expectancy of a tail gunner is 10 seconds, we was always told, because once they killed the tail gunner up to the waist, guns is unprotected. He could come right on the tail and just shoot the hell out of me.
Did you have to worry about contrails and German fighters coming up to the contrails?
Well, the only way you could see their stabilizers when they come through the contrail. That's where I could always be. But not only were they coming straight, they were coming from the sun, both sides, from the bottom, you name it. The worst thing that ever happened to me was one of your shells would get into the chamber and freeze in there. You couldn't, eject it. So you used to call up the waist gunner if it was the right or left gun and say, well, my right or left gun is, jammed, technically, because you hope and prayed when those 4 fighters from the tail come over, then call back to the next 4 fighters and say, hey, come at the left or the right, because he's only firing with one gun.
So now, when you were firing defensive, you didn't have unlimited ammunition, correct?
No, I had 400 rounds for each gun, 800 rounds, but you got to figure if you're over in enemy territory for 4 hours, you're going to save that ammunition. You're not going to waste it on one plane.
They taught them to use short bursts.
Short bursts. Because I had to handle my guns manually. I fired by tracer and led by tracer. 1 tracer, 2 armor piercing, 2 in the center there. Maybe I let go 30 rounds and I'm not even close to that German fighter. So you push your guns to the right or to the left. Sooner or later he's going to come in through your pattern of fire. That's when you give him a longer burst.
The role of the cargo aircraft, while not as glamorous as the bombers or fighters, was just as critical to the war effort. These aircraft were able to move large amounts of cargo quickly and effectively. They also transported wounded and even flew behind enemy lines to drop paratroopers for airborne assaults.
My name's Don Reed. I'm Public Relations Director for Atlantic Warbirds and Crew Chief. This is what you're looking at here is one of our airplanes. It is a C-47 World War II vintage. The airplane was built in around 1945. One of the interesting things about the airplane is that when it was built, it was intended to be sent to the Soviet Union, who at the time was our ally, as part of our Lend-Lease program. So originally, when you saw the airplane in 1945, it was painted olive drab green and had a big red star on the tail. During World War II, this airplane was used in many roles. It was used for troop transport. It was used to transport the wounded. It was used to transport a lot of cargo. In fact, I believe General Eisenhower said this is the airplane that won the war, because without troop supply, without cargo supply, you really can't carry on an efficient combat mission. What you're looking at here are the wounded litters, and these seats over here are what we call the jump seats, where the paratroopers would sit here, they would hook up. At the time they had to jump, they'd all, in fact, these seats would actually be on both sides, so that all the troops would, in order, move around to the door, hook up, and jump out. As you look forward, you can see the cockpit, and then the radio station and navigator station are up forward. This airplane also flew in just about every area of operation during World War II, in the Pacific, Europe, in the China-Burma-India theater. After World War II, it went on. It worked like crazy during the Korean era. It also participated in the Berlin airlift, and it went in service right all the way through Vietnam. In fact, the last ones were used by the military in the early 70s. This airplane at sometime in the future may actually be converted into the version called an AC-47, which was a ground attack platform carrying a lot of heavy armament. The airplane was called in by ground troop to concentrate fire on enemy positions. It was a real mean, screaming machine, and we may at some time in the future restore it to that configuration.
Fighter aircraft served many purposes during World War II. They were used in air defense roles, as escorts for bombers, on ground attack missions, fighter sweeps, and in reconnaissance sorties. Powered by single or twin engines, they would fly as high as 30,000 feet or as low as 25. P-38 Lightning was operational from 1941 to 1949. Its twin-engine layout was designed to provide for high speeds and range unheard of in its day. The aircraft was primarily used in the Pacific, where the long missions flown and low-level combat best suited its capabilities. In the European theater, It first served as an escort for bombers until the P-51 arrived on the scene. It was over the skies of France and Germany that the P-38 earned the nickname Der Gabelschwanz-Teufel, or Fork-tailed Devil. The P-38 was perhaps best known for three facts. It was the aircraft used to intercept and destroy Japan's military commander, Admiral Yamamoto. It was the mount of America's leading ace, Richard Bong, and it shot down more Japanese aircraft than any other Allied fighter.
Hello, I'm John Ellis from Kalamazoo, Michigan, and the Kalamazoo Air Zoo. And behind me is a Grumman F-7F Tiger Cat. This was an aircraft that was designed in 1941, first flew in 43, and this particular aircraft was manufactured in 45 and deployed in the Marine Squadron and was on the island of Guam when World War II ended. We're here today at the Wings of Eagle Air Show at Elmira to display this aircraft as part of the Grumman Cat Flight. That's a flight of piston-powered aircraft flying with also the Navy's F-14 Tomcat. It will represent 50 years of naval aviation history in one formation. Included today will be the F-6F Hellcat, the F-8F Bearcat, and I will lead the flight with the F-7F Tiger Cat, and an aircraft from the Naval Air Station, Oceana, Virginia, F-14 Tomcat will be joining us in that same formation. We think it's important that we continue to display these aircraft at air shows like Wings of Eagle so that people, particularly young people, can understand the heritage of aviation history that protect our way of life. You have to remember that without these aircraft defending us in World War II, we may not be here enjoying the freedoms that we do today. During World War II, there was a considerable advance in technology. World War II was the incentive and actually provided the catalyst for a lot of innovation in aviation. And as the aircraft continued to be produced, they were more powerful and faster to meet the demands of combat, because the enemy was producing aircraft that had capabilities, and they could fly higher, they could fly faster, they could carry more. And so that's why the aircraft evolved as it did. This aircraft continued to fly in the United States military until the mid-50s, when it was replaced by new technology. It was replaced by a jet airplane. This was the most powerful airplane built during World War II as a fighter. This aircraft is a reconnaissance version of the F-7F Tiger Cat, and after World War II it went to China and provided reconnaissance flights in China, while China was going a tremendous revolution, as you know, from a country that became communistic right after World War II. And so it was providing intelligence and reconnaissance missions at that time. After it finished that mission, it wound up at the Naval Test Center, Patuxent River, Maryland, doing some test work before it left active service. There are very few Tiger Cats that survive today. I think maybe there are 4 in the world that will fly out of 382 that were originally manufactured.
Allied pilots often personalized their aircraft with artwork on the front. Known as nose art, individual aircraft would often become identified by the art itself. As World War II was winding down, a technological revolution in aircraft design and manufacture was already underway. Piston engines gave way to jet turbines. The vast increases in speed required radical design changes of the aircraft themselves. The old adage, if it looks good, it flies good, lost its meaning as planes began to look more and more alike. As the planes became more complex, so did the task of flying them, and control was gradually taken away from human pilots and given over to automatic electronic devices. The end of World War II marked the end of an era of aviation.